Now in space, inky darkness between blinding points of light does a great job. It hides black holes, gaping, hungry, and scary. Their blackness makes it really difficult for astronomers to find detailed information about these space monsters. When a powerful and massive star reaches the end of its life, it can't just fade into nothingness. One of the most likely scenarios, the star will run out of its nuclear fuel. Then, in a blazing flash of light, it'll collapse under its own gravity. If the star was large enough, it'll turn into a black hole. There's a hypothetical type of black hole called primordial. Scientists have never gotten any real proof of their existence. These holes are insanely old and quite tiny, by black hole standards that is. Astronomers believe they could appear several milliseconds after the Big Bang. At that time, stars and galaxies weren't born yet. It means primordial black holes probably witnessed the entire history of the universe. By now, the smallest primordial black holes have most likely evaporated away, but the bigger ones can still be scattered out there in space. But how did primordial black holes appear in the first place? In the very beginning, space wasn't the same. In some regions, it was hotter. In others, cooler. And some areas were extremely dense. Scientists believe these dense spots could collapse into primordial black holes. The most curious thing, though? These holes might be so small exactly because they popped up right after the Big Bang. The longer it took a black hole to appear, the larger it was. The mass difference between older, smaller, and younger, bigger black holes was incredible. Compare the mass 1,000 times greater than our Sun's and that of a jelly bean. Now you get it. There was a theory that primordial black holes could actually be dark matter. This matter is believed to make up around 80% of the mass of the observable universe. Astronomers can't see this bizarre ingredient directly, since it doesn't emit light or any kind of energy. The idea remained unpopular for decades, but recently, scientists have realized there are many more black holes in the universe than they used to think, and it means the theory might actually work. And the vast and still hidden from us population of Big Bang black holes could not only make up but be dark matter. After all, astronomers haven't discovered a single dark matter particle yet, even after decades of searching. Some scientists argue that dark matter can't be tons of multi-sized primordial black holes. They would collide far too often for this to work out. Others object that black holes might exist in twos, and then a third one can always approach the pair and replace one of the initial holes. After all, our universe is swarming with black holes, and there's no lack of them. This process would repeat again and again, meaning there would be almost no merges or collisions. Primordial black holes might stay in clusters the size of the distance between our Sun and the nearest star. Each of these clusters can be home to thousands of black holes, all crammed together. A 30 solar mass monster of a black hole might sit at the center, with more common stellar ones occupying the rest of the space. Such clusters can be everywhere astronomers think dark matter is. But so far, this is still only an exciting theory, and some scientists don't support it yet. More data is needed. Now, black holes sometimes behave like massive galactic volcanoes. From time to time, they flare up, but instead of spewing lava, they produce enormous amounts of energy, and it makes gaping holes in the surrounding material and gas. A short while ago, scientists discovered one of the largest craters in the universe. Radio and X-ray telescopes detected a supermassive black hole that threw a temper tantrum many years ago. It happened in a galaxy cluster about 390 million light-years away from Earth. The crater left behind, which was actually a hole punched in the cluster's hot gas, could fit 15 Milky Way galaxies. Whoa. Recently, astronomers have found out that one of the most massive stars in the neighborhood might just have vanished. The star used to hover in space 75 million light-years away from Earth. It's usually too far away for scientists to clearly see individual stars, unless they're really massive, like the one we're talking about. It was gigantic and shining 2.5 million times brighter than our Sun. For the last time, Astronomers saw the star's light in 2011, but when they decided to examine it more closely several years later, they couldn't find it. Such huge stars usually go out in an extremely bright supernova, but nothing here, which puzzled the scientists to no end. There's a theory it collapsed into a black hole, and it happened without triggering a supernova first. It does occur among stars nearing the end of their lives, but very, very rarely. KB 141b is a planet outside of our solar system. At first glance, it's not that different from Earth. It has liquid oceans that evaporate into clouds, condense, and get back to the surface as rain. But instead of water, this all happens with rock. The surface of the exoplanet is covered with lava seas tens of miles deep. The temperature on K2-141b reaches 5,000 degrees during the day. That's hot enough for the magma in the oceans to vaporize into the atmosphere. Then, supersonic winds, which can move at the speed of 1 mile per second, carry this rock vapor to the planet's night side. The vaporized magma cools down, becomes liquid again, and falls as a rocky rain. Well, looks like we're gonna need a bigger bumbershoot. A star in the galaxy GSN 069 might turn into a planet the size of Jupiter in the next trillion years or so, all thanks to the star's regular encounters with a black hole. First, astronomers noticed bizarre X-ray bursts. Those were super bright and went off every 9 hours. After examining this phenomenon, the researchers realized it was a star getting flung in a unique orbit around a black hole, and the flashes they saw were the material being slurped off the star's surface. It happened every time the star darted past its greedy host. Over millions of years, the black hole has already transformed the red giant into a white dwarf, and the process isn't going to stop anytime soon. Astronomers have recently discovered some traces of phosphine in Venus's atmosphere. On Earth, this colorless and flammable gas is often found near microbes. That's why a new theory claims there might be life on Venus. But if there is, it could only appear high in the clouds, because no living organism would be able to survive the planet's extreme environment. Its surface is incredibly dry, with no liquid water, and the pressure 90 times greater than that on Earth's surface. The temperatures there reach almost 900 degrees, hot enough to melt certain metals. So that's a no? Methane, a gas that's usually produced by living things, was found on Mars in 2013. European Space Agency's Mars Express spacecraft detected it in Gale Crater near the Martian equator. This discovery might one day answer the question if there's life on Mars. Asteroid 2019 OK scared scientists by sneaking up on our planet in July of 2019. This rather large rock, up to 400 feet across, appeared seemingly out of nowhere. It traveled uncomfortably close to the Earth, a mere 45,000 miles away. That's less than 1/5 of the distance to the Moon. The Sun's outer layer is way hotter than its surface. The temperatures vary from 10,000 degrees close to the surface and a mind-boggling 1 million degrees in the corona. That's the Sun's outermost layer. The reason for this phenomenon might be nanoflares. Those are regular, powerful bursts of heat from the star. Another theory blames the layer that lies just beneath the Sun's surface. It seems to generate a weak magnetic field. That's why, when the energy from this layer leaves the Sun, it heats the corona through a mesh of magnetic branches and roots. The Moon might still be shrinking. Our planet's natural satellite has become 150 feet skinnier than it used to be several hundred million years ago. If its insides keep cooling, it might explain the quakes shaking the Moon's surface. In 2019, NASA's InSight lander, whose goal was to study the interior of Mars, registered the first marsquake ever. These quakes were coming fast, about 2 per day. Most of them were tiny. You wouldn't even feel them if they happened on our planet. So far, more than 300 marsquakes have been detected. Those are the first quakes on any space body other than the Earth and the Moon. Another mysterious phenomenon discovered by the mission was bizarre magnetic pulses. They occurred every midnight around the lander. It's still unclear what those pulses are. Maybe after midnight they're gonna let it all hang out, or something. Pluto's atmosphere rises much higher above the surface of the dwarf planet than, let's say, Earth's. It also has more than 20 layers, all of them freezing cold and extremely condensed. Oh, by the way, our moon also has some sort of atmosphere. Called an exosphere, it consists of helium, neon, and argon. It's 10 trillion times less dense than Earth's atmosphere. Or, really thin. Not so long ago, astronomers discovered a planet that got the name of UCF 1.01. This world is about 33 light-years away from Earth. This makes the planet our next-door neighbor, in the cosmic scheme of things, of course. Honestly speaking, the space body is only a planet candidate because astronomers haven't measured its mass yet, but they have high hopes. The wannabe planet is very different from our Earth. Just 1.7 million miles away from its star, it completes its orbit in a day and a half. It's a scorching, deserted world with the temperatures at the surface rising up to 1,000 degrees. Even more astounding, the entire planet is likely to be covered in magma. Even if UCF 10 ever had an atmosphere, it has definitely boiled away by now. But then, the question is, what if Earth once went through some catastrophic event and it left our planet in the same state, boiling hot with the surface covered by a thick layer of lava? Would people manage to adapt to such conditions and move to live underground? It sounds unbelievable, but experts are sure that with time, humans would turn into healthy and rather happy mole people. Of course, life would be very different than today. No more sunsets and sunrises. No more traveling by plane and space exploration, unless people found a way to launch a rocket from under the ground. No more picnics in the park or sunbathing at the seashore. People would have to build a vast network of underground tunnels that would connect major cities. The most likely transport in this new world would be silent high-speed trains and electric cars. After moving underground, people would have not only physical but also psychological difficulties. In the beginning, their new home would be a dark, barren place, without fresh air and devoid of any color. To adapt to these tough living conditions, people would have to make some design changes. Greenhouses, well-lit parks with trees and illusions of the sky, familiar scents and sounds. All this would help people to adjust to their new life. After living underground for several generations, people would start to look a bit different. Pale because of the lack of sunlight, with sensitive large eyes adapted to dimmer lighting and more developed lungs. As for the very possibility of living underground, well, hear me out. You might imagine the Earth's depths as a huge mass of compressed solid rock. But the reality is different. This mass is heavily cracked. Water runs down the fractures and cracks in the planet's outer layer, the crust. Some of these streams reach the depth of many miles. In other words, subsurface Earth could probably support plant and animal life. If people lived underground, they wouldn't have a shortage of fresh water. Its reservoirs in the planet's interior contain 100 times more water than all the lakes, rivers, and swamps combined. Plus, this water trickles through the soil that acts as a purifier. But people would have to be super careful to keep the sources of water intact. Otherwise, the underground cities would get flooded and turn into giant water-filled traps. It would also be a great challenge to live without sunlight. Plants can't survive without the sun's ultraviolet light. It's absolutely necessary for photosynthesis because sunlight is used to get nutrients from carbon dioxide in water. One of the byproducts of this process is oxygen, the thing people can't live without. So no sunlight equals no plants equals no oxygen. Sunlight is also crucial for humans. For example, it helps your brain release serotonin, a hormone that boosts your mood and makes you feel focused and calm. Thanks to the ultraviolet B radiation in the sun's rays, your skin produces vitamin D. It's vital for a strong immune system and healthy bones, teeth, and muscles. That's why people would have to find a replacement for sunlight. Luckily, LED lamps that can give off UV wavelength could produce the light human bodies and plants crave so much. In the new underground world, there wouldn't be large sunlit fields. Instead, there would be sprawling greenhouses with LED lights shining from the ceiling. Special machines would feed plants and crops with recycled water rich in nutrients. In some areas, located in the narrow underground faults, people would use something like shipping containers instead of greenhouses. These containers would be packed with vertical rows of plants and blue and red LED bulbs. As for people, they would have to follow a vitamin D-rich diet. It'd mean eating a lot of egg yolks, cheese, fish, spinach, soybeans, and so on. If these foods weren't enough, vitamin D supplements would do the trick. Without daylight, people would have problems with their circadian rhythms that regulate sleep patterns. If you were isolated somewhere without a glimmer of light, you would easily sleep for 48 hours at a stretch. That's why people living under the Earth's surface would rely on artificial lights to control their internal clock. There wouldn't be any problems with electricity. It would be produced with the help of the Earth's inner heat. Such kind of energy is called geothermal, from the Greek words geo, earth, and therm, heat. It can be extracted from hot water and rocks. Like an onion, our planet is made up of several layers. The innermost part is a solid core around 1,500 miles across. Made of iron, it's surrounded by a scorching outer core. It's up to 1,400 miles thick and is mostly composed of liquid nickel and iron. The next layer is the mantle. Even though lots of people picture it as lava, the mantle is actually rock. But this rock is so hot that it flows, just like road tar. The temperature in the Earth's core is as high as 10,800 degrees Fahrenheit. That's almost 1,000 degrees more than at the Sun's surface. The mantle is also blistering, from 7,000 degrees at the boundary with the core to 400 degrees in its outer parts. No wonder people wouldn't have any difficulties with transforming all this heat into electrical energy. But because the insides of our planet are insanely hot, people wouldn't be able to build cities too deep underground. All inhabitable areas would most likely stay closer to the surface. The Earth's outermost part, the crust, is like the shell of a hard-boiled egg. It's broken into gigantic blocks called tectonic plates. When two plates collide, mountains get formed and new rifts appear in the seafloor. They have different width, from 25 miles thick beneath the continents to 5 miles thick beneath the oceans. These blocks travel around, floating on the Earth's mantle, slowly, almost imperceptibly. It means underground cities would also move, but it would be next to impossible to notice these movements. Oh, by the way, people started to believe there might be another world inside our planet in the 17th century. The idea got the name of the hollow Earth theory. It claimed that half the planet was taken up by its surface weight. Below the surface, there was some empty space. A small sun hung at the very center of that cavity, creating a comfortable tropical environment on the inner side of Earth's surface. One could enter the Earth's interior through one of the openings near the south and north poles. A race of advanced humans was believed to live inside the planet. They were peaceful and lived for centuries. Well, obviously not humans. They had unique technologies, for example, flying vehicles. And since the climate inside the planet was better than that on the surface, this race was much stronger and healthier. Even though this idea sounds like science fiction, several famous scientists supported it. Some people are still sure there's another world inside our planet. But if the Earth was hollow, it wouldn't have a magnetic field. And without a magnetic field, solar winds would rid our planet of its atmosphere in the blink of an eye. This would leave our green planet deserted and uninhabitable, like Mars is. The magnetic field on our planet exists thanks to the processes going on in its very much not hollow center. Liquid metals are constantly moving in the Earth's outer core, generating electric currents. When the planet rotates around its axis, The electric currents form a powerful magnetic field. The sunward side of the magnetosphere is as large as 10 Earth's radii, and the other side stretches out in a magnetotail that spreads for 200 times the Earth's radius.
If the sun decided to stop producing light, then the animals in the wild would be the first to notice. Most animals need daytime to roam from place to place, especially in the large savannas in Africa. Zebras, wildebeests, and giraffes all need the day to move to avoid predators. As soon as the sun goes down, it's their bedtime. If the sun suddenly went dark, animals wouldn't comprehend what was going on and would simply become an early lunch for predators. Nocturnal creatures would be equally confused at the time change. Birds usually flock during the day, so we wouldn't hear or see any of them. We have them to thank for eating pests in the sky. Well, them and bats. But if you're in an area with no bats, then consider the insects to be the winners here. Temperatures would start to drop gradually. Humans would notice the effects as well. We're used to having the sun shining at the peak of noon, but with the sunshine's disappearance, we would be living in total darkness. It'd just be a matter of survival. If the sun suddenly got dark, then we'd only have around 8 minutes to enjoy the rest of it. That's because it takes that much time for sunlight to travel thousands of miles across the solar system. We would have to use UV lights to grow some crops, but it wouldn't be enough to feed the whole world. Not to mention the dropping temperatures across the world. Survival would be difficult in the open plain. Everyone would have to duck inside shelters and warm bunkers. Plants need photosynthesis to grow. Without it, we wouldn't have any crops. Bread wouldn't exist, since it needs wheat. Even the algae in the oceans need photosynthesis to survive, which is the highest source of oxygen rather than forests. This means oxygen levels would start to deplete. Large bodies of water like lakes, oceans, and seas would also start to lack oxygen to sustain marine life. One of our main sources of vitamin D is the sun. There are other ways of getting it, but the sun is the best and most convenient way. Without crops or vegetation, all the herbivores would have to rummage for the last green grass on land or a leaf hanging from a tree. They would soon run out of food, which would also be bad news for us humans, since we need animals like cows, horses, and sheep for our livelihoods. This wouldn't happen overnight. Of course, the oceans would remain warm for some time, but eventually, they would get cold and freeze. Earth is still a planet powered by an iron core that produces so much heat. This would not be enough to keep the planet warm. Our next step would be finding the right shelter and keeping warm. If this happened overnight, then chances are there wouldn't be any ready-made bunkers for a scenario like this, unless you're watching this video and decide to build one after. They would have to provide heat 24/7 and be capable of growing crops under UV light. Solar-powered facilities would be a thing of the past. People would have to wear sustainable suits when venturing out into the open. Since it would be so dark, we would need strong lights or powerful night vision goggles to see anything. The lands would be desolate. Nocturnal creatures that can handle freezing temperatures would take it over. Structures would collapse, since there would be oxygen depletion. Concrete needs oxygen to remain intact. The bunkers themselves would have limited oxygen as well. We would need to uproot many trees and place them under strong UV lights for them to produce oxygen. In turn, it would produce its ecosystem in the large underground bunkers. The oceans on the surface would freeze over eventually. Gathering any natural resources from the ocean floor, like gas or oil, would be impossible. The large object, which used to be a bright and sunny star, would still be floating around. But what would happen if the sun disappeared overnight? Well, pretty much the same thing, except way worse. The sun is the largest celestial object in our solar system, which keeps all of our planets lined up the way they are. They orbit around the sun, minding their own business. Without such a large object keeping them steady, the planets would start to float around randomly. Some might even collide with each other. In other cases, the planets would just float around and fly off into space eventually, until they found a new star to orbit around. Earth might or might not be one of those planets. our planet would still be dark. We would be flying through space at an unusual speed. The planet wouldn't rotate on itself, and many objects would crash into us. We'd be in the trajectory line of mass comets waiting to strike us down. The threat of the cold wouldn't be a major factor anymore. It would be what's beyond us. This means we'd have to dig our bunkers deeper. We wouldn't have an atmosphere anymore to trap any form of heat or anything. We would be floating for an eternity. But let's go back to that scenario where the sun just decided to go dark. Don't worry, our planet would still be orbiting the sun along with the other planets. The temperatures would keep plummeting until nothing could survive on the surface. It would be total darkness 24/7. Only bacteria and possibly tardigrades could survive on the surface. Tardigrades are microscopic critters that can survive just about anything, including outer space. Eventually, oxygen would be absent from the Earth's surface, and there wouldn't be anything up there anymore except for them. Since they would be the dominant and possibly the only creatures on the surface, they'd manage to evolve into bigger species and produce many more. Hundreds of thousands of years into the future, humans would have had to evolve to the conditions underground. Our eyes would be much bigger to take up as much light as possible. Our skin would become whiter since there would be no sun underground. Our hearing would also be much more sensitive since the underground would create echoing sounds. We'd still have the intellect we do now, but our bodies would be ready for the surface. The main threat would be the giant tardigrades sluggishly dragging themselves around. Under a microscope, they look kind of cute, but imagine them the size of a polar bear. Still want something like this in your backyard? They can live anywhere, so they'd infiltrate the bunkers now and then. They'd get ferocious and come in different sizes and shapes. At this point, humans would not be the dominant species, since they'd have to hide underground. Some tardigrades from different tribes wouldn't be friendly with each other. Major cities that used to be bustling with people would be home to giant water bears. Tardigrades are known as water bears since they kind of look like little bears, but these beasts with 8 legs would be much bigger than them. Bears and most animals would have been wiped out on the surface. Under the ice, some deep-sea creatures would thrive and have moved closer to the surface. These animals were used to living in darkness away from the sun, but over thousands of years of dominating the waters, they'd have grown to enormous sizes. Some of these creatures would adapt to crawling out of the mainland. Even though the surface would be frozen, they'd still find ways to crack through the ice and make their way. Humans, meanwhile, would create large underground channels and networks, building cities and colonies. We'd dominate the tunnels where our hands and feet would grow to become web-like and large. We'd take over everything underground and remain the smartest species on Earth. We'd manage to keep old art pieces from the surface and important records to stay as human as possible. We'd keep on surviving no matter what.